Hello and welcome back. We looked at motion and the different types of motions that we have. I would say that motion of an object can be described as the physical, visible movement between 2 points. So whenever you say that something is in motion, you must actually observe that it is moving from one point to the other, from point A to point B, just the way you move from your house to the church. So that is motion. Movement from your house to the church. Movement from the door of your house to your gate. That is motion. So, and this motion is always enabled by applied force. In physics, motion is enabled by applied force. Now, the study of objects in motion and the force associated with it or with them is called dynamics. So, whenever you're studying motion in relation to the force that is causing it, we call it dynamics. But when you study just the motion of an object, we call it kinematics. Very, very important. So pay attention. You're going to be writing tests on all these. Now, we look at the different types of motion. What are the types of motion available? Number one type of motion is translational motion. Motion in a straight line. JAMB is going to ask you which of the following is known as motion in a straight line. It is translational motion. And what is translational motion? Translational motion is the motion of an object in a straight line as a result of applied force. Very good example of translational motion is the motion of a wheel pusher moving a luggage from one point to another, or from point A to point B. Jam is going to ask you, when a woman is carrying the baby is pushing the baby from one point to the other, what kind of motion is that? Once it's in a straight line from point A to point B, that is translational motion. They are going to ask you the motion of a car from one point to the other. That is movement in a straight line. It is translational motion. It is not any other motion. But when you look at the wheel of the car or the tire is actually making rotational motion. But the actual movement of the body of the car from one point to the other is translational motion. Take note. Take note. Okay, let's look at the number two type of motion. We call it oscillatory motion or vibratory motion. So motion about a fixed point is known as oscillatory motion. So when you talk about motion of your, like the guitar you use in your church, when somebody plucks the string of the guitar, you find out that the string is moving up and down about a fixed point. We call that vibratory motion. Another good example of oscillatory or vibratory motion is the movement of a simple pendulum. Whenever you tap a simple pendulum, it goes up, down, making such motion for some time before it halts. That is vibrational or oscillatory motion. Then you also talk about the motion of a helical spring that has a load suspended on it. Once you tap the load, you find out that the spring will be moving up and down. That is another example of oscillatory motion. Okay, so you can see them diagrammatically here. This is a typical simple pendulum. It has a ball connected to this long rope. So you tap it, it moves front and back. This is a simple pendulum. Then this is a typical helical spring. You can see the helical spring and you can see the load that is attached. Once you tap this load, you are going to observe an up and down motion of the spring. That is another good example of oscillatory motion. Okay, let's move forward. Now we look at rotational motion. Rotational motion is the motion of a body in a cycle or ellipse about an axis. Typical example is the rotational motion of the earth about its axis that causes the day and night. That is rotational motion. Another good example of rotational motion is the motion of the blade of fan. So when you on your fan, you find out that the blades of the fan, they keep rotating. That is another good example of rotational motion. And JAMB is going to ask you which of the following is not an example of rotational motion. And they're going to tell you the movement of the blades of the fan, movement of Earth around its axis, or circular movement of the Earth around the sun. You should know that it is the circular movement of the Earth around the sun. The circular movement of the Earth around the Sun is an example of circular motion, not rotational. The rotational motion is the motion of the Earth around its axis, the way the Earth rotates that causes the day and night. Very important. Then we'll have also what we call random motion. Motion that is done in no specific direction is random motion. Zigzag motion of gas molecule is a very good example of random motion, or the motion of pulling grain on water. Those are two types of random motion. Motion with no specific direction, random motion. Okay, then finally the fifth type of motion is circular motion, which is motion in a circle. Motion in a circle at constant speed. Typical example is the motion of the Earth around the Sun that is done at constant speed. That's why it takes 1 year for the Earth to move around the Sun. Every year it takes 365 days because the Earth is moving at constant speed around the Sun. Very, very important. So those